I'm David Sawyer with the Alabama Policy Institute. Nobody likes the idea that there are legal orders that affect your life and you don't even know about them. Turns out there are. They're called consent decrees. We're going to explain to you what a consent decree is and why you should care about them.
A consent decree is simply a document that ends a lawsuit by way of settlement. There are consent decrees entered in any number of lawsuits every day. They're very common occurrences. Most lawsuits settle, and a lot of them have written decrees that set out the terms of the settlement. The type of consent decree we're concerned about in the paper, though, is a consent decree used in a kind of litigation called institutional reform litigation. These were lawsuits that began to be brought in the mid and late 1960s by different sort of activist groups that were trying to, say, reform prison, the management of prisons or the management of mental health facilities. There are hundreds of these decrees that have been entered around the country with regard to prisons, with regard to schools, with regard to environmental protection, with regard to services to low-income or mentally handicapped populations, consent decrees about state governments and Medicaid and the Social Security Act. So the consent decrees we looked at were the ones that confine the state government's ability to set policy and conduct the business of state agencies and subject that to the continuing oversight of a federal judge and the group of litigants who brought the case initially. Sometimes these last for years. They're set up to work essentially indefinitely. And so they can be a very expensive and time-consuming and hamstringing restriction on the ability of the state government to function.
When you get into a consent decree, the judge is no longer confined to the merits of the case. If you go to court and you lose, there's no guarantee that the judge will be confined to the merits of the case, but at least you've got a very reasonable means and basis for appeal. Whereas in a consent decree, once you've consented, you can't appeal.
Now that you know a little bit more about consent decrees, I bet you're wondering about some concrete examples. In the next segment, you're going to find out some of those examples from our API president, Gary Palmer, and we'll find out why those consent decrees have meant so much to your wallet.